Captain Emily Carter's hand froze on the Apache's door handle as Major Thompson stepped into her path. His voice cut through the pre-dawn air with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. She stood there in her flight suit, helmet tucked under her arm, every inch the professional pilot. Behind Thompson, 3 other male pilots watched with barely concealed smirks, their morning coffee steaming in the desert air. Carter had been on the flight roster for Exercise Thunderstrike. She'd prepared for weeks, memorized every detail, arrived 45 minutes early to complete her pre-flight inspection. The Apache beside her was mission-ready, fully fueled, all systems green. But none of that mattered to the men blocking her path. Thompson moved closer, his words measured and deliberate. This was a combat simulation, he explained. Real tactics, real scenarios. They couldn't afford to have someone who might freeze up when things got intense. The implication hung in the desert air like poison. Around them, the most advanced attack helicopter in the world sat silent, its twin engines cold, its weapon systems powered down. Carter had trained for 2 years to fly this machine. She'd earned her wings, passed every test, exceeded every standard. But what the men around her saw wasn't a pilot. It was a liability. What none of them knew was that in 6 hours, when everything went catastrophically wrong, Emily Carter would prove them more mistaken than they could possibly imagine. And a 4-star general would witness something that would change military aviation forever. Welcome to Veterans Voice, where we share the stories of those who served with honor, courage, and distinction. Before we continue with this incredible story of breaking barriers in the sky, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please hit that subscribe button to support our growing community. We're honored to have you here with us. Fort Rucker, Alabama had been the heart of Army aviation for decades. Its sprawling complex of runways, hangars, and training facilities had shaped generations of military pilots. But in the pre-dawn darkness of this particular morning, the base hummed with unusual activity. Exercise Thunderstrike was no ordinary training mission designed to test new combat tactics and pilot capabilities. It would push both machines and aviators to their absolute limits. 6 AH-64 Apache helicopters sat on the flight line, their angular silhouettes cutting sharp shadows against the hangar lights. These weren't just aircraft. They were technological marvels. Each Apache represented $30 million of cutting-edge engineering. Armed with Hellfire missiles, 30mm chain guns, and sensor systems that could detect targets from miles away. In the right hands, they were the most formidable attack helicopters ever built. Captain Emily Carter had spent 2 years learning to handle these machines. Flight school at Fort Rucker had been brutal. 18 months of intensive training where 60% of candidates washed out. She'd graduated 3rd in her class, earning her wings through a combination of natural talent and relentless determination. But graduation was just the beginning. The real test came in operational assignments where textbook knowledge met the harsh reality of military culture. Carter had arrived at her current base 6 months ago, eager to prove herself in an actual combat unit. Instead, she'd found herself fighting battles that had nothing to do with enemy forces. The Apache pilots at the base were an elite group, experienced combat veterans who'd flown missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. They were skilled, confident, and unified by a brotherhood forged in war zones. They were also without exception men. Carter was the first female pilot assigned to their unit, and the reception had been cold from day one. Not openly hostile, the military had policies against that, but subtly unwelcoming in dozens of small ways. Training schedules that somehow didn't include her. Briefings where her input was ignored. Flight assignments limited to basic transport missions while the men flew the complex combat scenarios. Major Thompson, the unit's operations officer, had been particularly resistant. A decorated pilot with 3 combat tours, he commanded respect and loyalty from the other aviators. His approval could make or break a pilot's career, and he'd made it clear that Carter would need to prove herself beyond any reasonable doubt. The implication was always present, though never stated directly. Women might be capable of flying helicopters, but combat aviation required something different, something that Carter, in his opinion, didn't possess. So for 6 months, she'd watched from the sidelines as the men flew increasingly complex missions. She'd studied their tactics, memorized their procedures, and waited for her chance to prove that she belonged among them. Exercise Thunderstrike was supposed to be that chance. The mission profile called for all available pilots, including Carter. The scenario was complex, a simulated rescue operation in hostile territory requiring precise coordination between multiple aircraft and ground forces. Carter had prepared for weeks. She'd memorized every aspect of the mission, studied the terrain, practiced the tactical maneuvers until they became second nature. She'd arrived at the flight line 45 minutes early, her pre-flight checklist completed with meticulous attention to detail. But as the other pilots gathered around the aircraft, she realized that once again she was being excluded. Thompson called out as the flight crews began their final preparations. Carter was grounded. He announced maintenance issues with her aircraft. She looked at her assigned Apache, the same machine she'd pre-flighted without finding any problems. All systems were green. The maintenance logs told a different story. Nothing wrong with the aircraft, nothing that would prevent it from flying. The only issue was the lie being told to keep her on the ground. Around them, the other pilots exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable with the obvious deception. Others seemed relieved that they wouldn't have to fly with her. All of them remained silent. Carter stood alone on the tarmac as the 6 Apache helicopters spooled up their engines. The distinctive whine of turbine power filled the air, drowning out conversation. One by one, the aircraft lifted off, their rotor wash creating miniature dust storms as they departed for the training area. She watched them disappear into the morning sky, feeling the familiar mixture of frustration and determination that had become her constant companion. Behind her, the hangar crews went about their routine maintenance, pointedly ignoring her presence. What none of them realized was that 3 hours into Exercise Thunderstrike, everything would go wrong. Equipment would fail, communications would break down, and lives would hang in the balance. And the only pilot position to save the mission would be the one they'd refused to let fly. The first sign of trouble came at 0847 hours, transmitted over the base radio in the clipped professional tone that masked growing panic. Thompson's voice carried across the airwaves from the training area 60 miles away, reporting multiple aircraft down. Carter was in the hangar reviewing technical manuals while the maintenance crew worked around her. The radio crackled with static as reports flooded in from the training area. Multiple aircraft down. Real injuries, not simulated ones. The exercise scenario had gone live, becoming a genuine emergency. The hangar fell silent. Mechanics stopped their work, listening intently as the situation unfolded over the radio. Carter moved closer to the communications console, her heart racing as she processed the incoming reports. 2 Apaches had experienced mechanical failures during low-level maneuvers. One had made an emergency landing in rough terrain, its crew injured but alive. The other had crashed into a ravine, its pilots trapped in the wreckage. Ground forces were scattered across the training area, some dealing with real injuries from the crashes, others continuing the exercise because they hadn't received word to stop. Communications were breaking down as different units operated on different frequencies and protocols. The base commander's voice cut through the confusion, calling all available aircraft to emergency stations. This was not a drill. They had real casualties requiring immediate evacuation. Carter looked around the hangar. The 6 Apaches assigned to Thunderstrike were either crashed or stranded in the training area. The base's other helicopters were either undergoing maintenance or deployed elsewhere. The nearest medical evacuation aircraft were at least 90 minutes away, except for one. In the corner of the hangar sat an AH-64 Apache that had been removed from the exercise roster for maintenance issues. The same aircraft Carter had been told she couldn't fly. She walked over to it now, her trained eyes scanning the machine for any signs of actual problems. The maintenance logs showed routine inspections, all completed, all signed off. The aircraft was fully operational, fully armed, and fully fueled. The only thing preventing it from flying was the lie that had been told to keep her on the ground. One of the mechanics approached her cautiously. The bird was good to go, he admitted. Had been all morning. If she was thinking what he thought she was thinking, he could have her spun up in 5 minutes. Over the radio, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. More reports of injuries, confusion about priorities, and growing desperation in the voices of those calling for help. The base commander was trying to coordinate multiple rescue operations with insufficient resources. Carter made her decision. She told the mechanic to get the Apache ready. Full fuel, full weapons load. She was going to need everything the machine had.